Hello and welcome to Crisis What Crisis, a new podcast series designed to be a useful field guide as we all try to navigate and come to terms with a dramatically changed world. Whether personal, professional or both, crisis is without doubt a new shared experience. I'm Andy Coulson, a former newspaper editor, Downing Street Director of Communications and inmate of HMP Belmarsh. For the last 4 years I've been trying to put all my experience, the good and the bad, to use as a strategic advisor to business leaders. And I can tell you that the bad has been just as useful as the good. And that got me thinking that there are plenty of great podcasts out there where you can hear stories of success. There are far fewer where you can benefit from the experience of those whose lives have properly unravelled. So in Crisis What Crisis, I'll be talking to the embattled, shamed, courageous, ruined, damaged, resilient, unlucky and lucky survivors of crisis. Some names will be familiar, some less so. But our guests will talk about their experiences honestly, often with humour, but always in the hope that what they have to share might be useful to anyone facing down their own demons and challenges. Put simply, these are crisis stories worth sharing. Given where we are right now, this podcast was, of course, recorded remotely, and I'm afraid the sound quality is in places less than perfect. Apologies, but thanks for sticking with it, and I hope you'll still enjoy it. Our guest today is the economist, academic and author Vicky Pryce. After a long and successful career in the corporate world, Vicky joined the Department of Trade and Industry as Chief Economic Advisor in August 2002, the first woman to be appointed to the post. She later became the joint head of the UK Government Economic Service. In 2012, her first book, Greekonomics, was published. But as her analysis of the Eurozone crisis was being prepared for publication, Vicky was facing her own personal crisis. A criminal allegation of perverting the course of justice that centred on her taking driving points for her now ex-husband was underway. In February 2012, she was formally charged. She pleaded not guilty, raising a defence of marital coercion at trial the following year, which ended when the jury failed to reach a verdict. A retrial not long after ended in a guilty verdict, and she was sentenced with her ex-husband to 8 months in prison. Soon after her release, Vicky published another book, Prisonomics, which detailed her time as an inmate of Holloway and East Sutton Prison and studied the economic implications of the justice system. Vicky's life since released has been a whirlwind of energy and positivity, putting her life experiences to best possible use with a multitude of roles as an economic commentator, but also as a patron of prison charity Working Chance. Vicky, thank you for joining us on the podcast today. I used the word positive a moment ago, but prolific also applies. It's very clear that when you say you don't look back, you mean it. Is your work ethic part of your armoury, do you think?
Possibly, although of course when one says you don't look back, it doesn't mean that what you've experienced goes away. You take it with you and you try and do something with it as well. So there's no way I'm going to forget that period, and I've tried to carry it with me in everything I do in the future. It has actually impacted quite considerably on what I've been doing since. So it's increased my interest in how women fare in society and inequalities that exist. So I've written books as well on women's position in the workplace and all the obstacles that are put in their development all across the world, of course, not just in the UK. So my recent book is called Women versus Capitalism, and just looks very much at the way in which the economic potential of women is affected by all the obstacles that are out there. And when you think about women in prison, what tends to happen, of course, it is the most vulnerable women who end up having to spend time, the ones that end up committing crimes, quite often not necessarily because that's what they wanted to do, but because they've been forced to do so by circumstances or by other people. And they are the ones that tend to be also abused, whether we're looking at emotional abuse or physical abuse. And of course, they also have either psychological and drink problems. Certainly the period of that great upheaval in my life made me rethink what one's priorities really should be in terms of having a voice and talking about these issues.
You were born in Greece, the middle of 3 children. You describe it as a pretty tough environment for a girl to achieve, but you were an independent youngster, riding your motorbike, I understand, through the streets of Athens, aged 12. and you leave home in 1969, age 17, to come to London to improve your English and pursue an education.
My father thought that was it. English had to be the next language. So I did start learning it, and I was sent to England one summer, I remember, when I was already in the German school. The idea had been that I'd go and study in Germany perhaps at some stage. And my father made the huge mistake of sending me to this place in Reading. It was a girls' school where you learned English alongside lots and lots of little French girls. And of course, we didn't do any English at all. I would just follow them on the train, Paddington, and then down the King's Road, and took one look at London, and I thought, this is it. This is where I want to come. So I practically ignored everything I was doing at school and started doing a lot more English and a lot more, research on how I can get to England. So in parallel to what I was doing in school, I started doing GCSEs and then beginning to think about A-levels alongside some other friends. And that's how I decided to come. And my parents were rather shocked that I decided to leave.
You were very young. I mean, that's what I'm interested in really, is that when you look back at yourself then, do you reckon, and given, where, the sort of twists and turns that life take, can you recognize the sort of seeds of the resilience that you clearly have in yourself at that age?
Yes, I was very independent, I have to say. Even though the environment was stacked against women at the time, my parents were very open-minded, so that was good. So they sort of encouraged that independence, or rather they tolerated it. In fact, if anything, by sort of taking me to all sorts of extra lessons and what have you, they were opening up my horizons quite significantly. But I have to say, there was a tendency for Greeks to go and study abroad, as I mentioned earlier. So my brother went to the States at the same time as I did. My sister, because we all left, decided to stay behind. So it was pretty common, but not really for women at the time. And that was the real difference. And I remember quite a lot of my relatives talking to my parents, because at the time, of course, we had lost everything because we had the colonels in power. So not only did I come to England on my own, but I had no cash at all.
Yeah.
So they said, why are you doing it? Why are you letting your daughter go? And my father said, well, that's what she wants. And that was extraordinary. So I owe a lot actually to my parents and my upbringing, even though they were tough in terms of women's role in society and what have you. They were also very, very keen on education, and that was really important for me.
I listened to an interview the other day with the actor Brian Cox, and he said something that I thought was rather brilliant. That if we want to remind ourselves, of who we really are, we just need to carry a picture of ourselves as a child. Essentially, that's our truth, and that everything else, as he put it, is propaganda. On that basis, are you still that sort of 12-year-old hammering through the streets of Athens, on a motorbike?
Yes.
Fiercely independent and just driving forward.
Yes, I think you don't change. This is the interesting thing. Above a certain age, which is 12, as you said, I'm very much the same person. Obviously, I know more, and through the process, one has made loads of mistakes, of course, but one is basically formed then, and one remains like that despite all the interesting things that may happen to you on the way.
You get to work in London as a budding economist after graduating from the LSE. A very tough career choice in a very tough decade, in a very tough city for a young woman. More resilience training, one imagines. Again, when you look back at those early years at work and how they formed, kind of your strength of character, what comes to mind?
Oh, they were an amazing experience, because if I remember correctly, when I was hired to be an economist for a bank, I must have been the first woman economist employed there. And I do remember a conversation with my boss, who was very, very open-minded, which I overheard, ringing the Bank of England to say that he couldn't come to a meeting. Could he send someone else in his place? And of course I said yes. And he says, but is it okay because it's a woman? Or he may even have said it's a girl, because obviously it was just not done. So what I have developed is a sort of way of being resilient in that area, which is has come naturally actually to me, which is work very, very closely with all the people who work for you. And I have said this whenever I made a presentation on how to be a true leader, if you like, particularly if you're a woman, which is, have people who work for you, who are very bright, better than you if possible, and rely on them and delegate. Don't just take it all on yourself, and also don't try and be perfect. You're just never going to do it, because I also had a big family and work, and I traveled hugely for a long period of time. And that has been incredibly helpful, because what you end up having is a huge supporter network. So this resilience you can't just do it by yourself, in the sense that you can't just rely on your inner resources. There's a limit. Yes. What you do need is the support all around you. And I have carried that throughout my life. And even when I came, out of prison, it was that network that really did it for me.
Let's move on to 2011, Vicky, when the police begin their investigation into you and the allegation that you took your husband's speeding points. I should say for people listening that this podcast is not about picking over the detail of someone's crisis. If that's what you want, no doubt you'll find it elsewhere online. But this podcast is about trying to identify the ways we might navigate a proper challenge. My view of crisis, for what it's worth, is that you can't begin to get through unless you confront the reality of what's happening to you. When in your situation were you able to get to that point, to realize that it was real, and it was serious?
Oh, well, it became obvious that it was serious, and of course the press were very interested and all that sort of stuff. But I carried on working, and I got huge support from the people I worked for. So I had by then, of course, left the government. I left working for the government. I left at the end of, towards the end of 2010. So I did actually work for the coalition government as well for a while, which was very interesting, just seeing the differences that were there. So I think there was generally incredulity all around me, but nothing changed in terms of the way I was working, which was really good. And during that period too, I wrote the book Economists, because the crisis was happening. In fact, I had never been so busy in terms of interviews on Greece and writing about it, not just on Greece, of course, but on the Euro crisis generally. So that was quite a nice way to survive that period, because otherwise it would have been incredibly worrying and intense. So, and the support from network continued throughout, and of course until 2013, when the verdict came, and then the period when I was actually away. So
it was horribly public. You were married to someone who was very comfortable in the public gaze, at least then, if I can put it that way. But I'm guessing that you weren't.
Well, it wasn't very easy, but it was interesting because you mentioned the trial earlier. I had somehow decided in my mind that how you look is really important. So every day that I would get to the court, I would always come with a cup of coffee, which I absolutely needed, so I still do. And I would be careful what I wore so that I looked okay every day, because I think as a woman it's much more important, and that's where again it came to me that there's a difference in terms of how you're treated between a man and a woman. And then of course the moment I would come out of London Bridge and start walking towards the court, I knew at a certain point that all the photographers would be there. And actually, I took the view that they were doing their job. And the important thing is to let them take the pictures. So I would stop and let them take the pictures. And then I'd walk a bit, and if they asked me to stand in a certain way, I would do too. I would do exactly that. And I do remember that there were some very, very funny moments. There was a guy, for some reason, with a dog, with a placard on the dog, about nuclear, for some reason, green energy, who would insist on coming in the middle of the picture. So I was able to make room for him, and then when we could, without him having the ability for the photographers to take the picture, and they were very grateful for that. So they never took a bad picture. They never took a picture that showed you in a bad light. And my view has always been that if you don't look downtrodden, then that's to your benefit. And I didn't look downtrodden. And in a way, these photographers sort of became my friends, and they would come up, actually. I'd occasionally sit outside the courtroom. And later, of course, I'd see them again, because they would take pictures of me when I was entering the BBC to do an interview, or they would take a picture because they were covering a particular story that I was talking about. And they say, "Hi, Vicky," and so on. So it's quite interesting. I think we often look at the various bits of the press and think that they are enemies, but they're just doing their jobs, really. And you've got to make sure that they can do their jobs easily.
Yes.
And in a way, in the end, it's helpful to both.
How did you cope with the process of prosecution? The being in a room full of people who don't know you at all, who you don't know at all, but who'll decide your fate. That sort of loss of control. How did you feel when you found yourself sitting, in a dock in that situation?
You're quite right. One could lose control, but you can react to this. And the way that I reacted and the way that I survived it was by almost being an observer of what was happening. And I found it fascinating, something I learned. So you've got to avoid thinking of yourself as sort of victim right in the middle of all this, but somebody who takes part in this. You don't know exactly what's going to happen in the end. You may have some influence over it, but it is an experience to go through. And that actually worked very well. And I managed to go every day and actually take it in and not let it seriously upset me.
But there must have been moments where clearly you achieved that. In the way that you talk about it now, I remember well, being in a similar situation myself, and then took a very similar approach. But there are days when that's very difficult. What did you do when that was, a struggle? What techniques would you use to kind of bring yourself back to that place when you're sat in a court and your values are being questioned, who you are is under the sort of microscope? What sort of, this podcast is all about trying to give people the kind of tools, if you like, to deal with not just this kind of crisis but any crisis. What did you do to bring yourself back to that place you just described?
I could think of nice things to spend my time on. So if things were, obviously I would have to listen to see what was being said, but nevertheless there would be pauses in between. I would just go back to things that I remember that were rather nice, think about my children, think about nice times, think about Greece, the sea, and knowing also that I had the support out there. And that would calm me down very, very significantly. And I wouldn't do it necessarily consciously, but it just happened. Maybe I'm just used to it because I've been in quite a lot of difficult situations in my life. Already talked about the sort of progress of my career, but also personal life, which sounds like it's smooth, but of course there had been difficult times, and you have to just, in a way, distance yourself a bit, and that's the only way to do it, in my view. You just take yourself away a little bit, and it's all happening around you. It's interesting, but you don't have to be a particularly active participant at every point that this is happening. And I think that I've done that throughout, and also during my period, of course, the 2 months that I spent in prison, I did the same. But
so does that go to, the need to sort of surrender control, if you like, to kind of accept that you are where you are. There is only so much you can do to influence it.
No, you don't surrender control at all. In fact, you take control that way. Because these things may happen, but if they don't have quite the impact on you than would otherwise be the case, then you're in control.
Did in the tough moments, and over the period, I suppose, did the anxiety manifest itself in any way, or were you able to keep all that in the right place, kind of throughout?
Oh, there was a certain amount of anxiety. There's no doubt about that. But I carried on, and that was the important thing. And even up to the last minute, I was still working and writing and doing those things. So you have to do that. I mean, the anxiety was always there. I'm pretty certain my blood pressure must have gone up very significantly. Actually, I measured it when I went to Holloway, and it had dropped.
Right.
In other words, it was perfect.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't recommend going to prison to bring your hypertension down, but it certainly seemed to do, because that period of anxiety, if you like, was over.
Yes.
It was a different type, but it really made a difference. So yes, obviously it still happens. You can't necessarily control that completely, but you can still be in as much control as you possibly can, or at least you must make sure you are. Otherwise, it overwhelms you.
Did you seek any advice? Did you talk to anyone who'd been through a similar situation? Presumably your lawyers, obviously, you sort of live that kind of world in a way, were there for you. But was there professional help? Are you a believer in that? Do you sort of believe in counselling or that kind of help?
No, but in terms of going away for however many months, I mean, the first thing that I have to say is that certainly going through the process, when I said goodbye to the children, I really thought of the day of the sentencing that I might be away for 5 months, or because I had no idea whether it would be a year or whatever.
The lawyers had warned you that it could be that long.
It could be long, could even be longer. And frankly, when the verdict was announced and then the sentencing, sorry, the verdict had already been announced, but the sentencing, I realized that I would only really be in prison for 2 months. And that was very cheering for me. And it would have been, I thought, for the kids as well, if they realized it. So it actually, was a great relief. So instead of going to prison feeling really, really bad, I actually went thinking, that's fine. Of course, I'm considerably luckier than all these people that I met, who are there for much longer, were there for much longer. So in many ways, I'm one of the privileged ones. And I also knew that I had somewhere to come back to, and a house, that I wasn't going to lose it in the process.
Yes.
I wasn't going to lose my kids in the process. I mean, it's terrible what happens to women. It's one of the reasons why I've written the book. It happens also to men, of course. So about the fact that it just makes very little sense sending people to prison who are not a threat to society. Like, you think of other ways of doing it. It costs society a lot, and it really doesn't help these people either in terms of rehabilitation, wouldn't call it that. And it's a waste. It's a really serious waste for them. But for me, of course, it was a short period, so I could limit that waste, if you like, quite considerably. And I had ways of getting back, and loads of other women I met did not, and I'm sure loads of men do not. So that was quite positive. And also, I had troubled hugely in my time. I would leave the house, and the times I spent it in developing countries, and I just decided in my mind to consider this as going off for a while to do a particular job or to get through a particular. And a number of the conditions that I had to put up with when I travelled were terrible.
So work. So, you just treated it. You treated it like a fairly miserable work assignment with bad expenses and worse food.
Something like that. Although, of course, I had no idea what to expect. You asked whether there's any advice. I didn't really speak to very many people, and I had read a little bit about what it's all about and what I could take and couldn't take. So I did exactly that, and that worked. At the time, it was pretty lax because it was before they started trying to prevent people from being sent books, for example. While I was there, I was receiving so many books. I think I was receiving, on average, I received 2.5 books a day. 2.5 books, some of them very big books, being sent by everybody. And that was absolutely extraordinary, including, I don't know how many stamps I was sent, which I then managed to use for the next year. But
yes,
so I was very lucky in that point of view. And I decided to really, really use my time in quite a productive way, I thought, and to consider it as something to be experienced and to go through, and not knowing, of course, how exactly I would come out.
Yes, I mean, we both, of course, experienced that moment of being found guilty and sentenced to jail in court. whatever you read or prepare, it's a truly wretched moment. You say that you focused on the positives, but in that moment, what were you saying to yourself?
It's a very good question. Do I remember exactly? I was so prepared for it that for me it was the fact that it wasn't going to be anything like as bad as I had expected. So it was a positive when the sentence came, rather than the other way around, which is really quite interesting.
But you're still, you're not leaving the door. You're going through the other door.
Oh, which was actually the funniest bit of all, because there were so many funny moments and so many human moments that you found with people who dealt with your transfer to prison. So I was indeed taken down, which was, as I said, expected anyway. And then they tried to see what I had in my handbag, because obviously I couldn't take loads of things that were in there. And my bag was fine with all my clothes, it seems. I had taken just the right amount. But my handbag, I had to count all the money that was in it and put it away so I can have it at some other stage. And of course, I was just a complete idiot. I intended to leave lots of cash for the kids to pay for whatever was going to be happening those many months I was going to be away. And of course, I wrote them checks in the end, and all the cash that I was taking out of the machines constantly all that time, expecting some sort of verdict, and therefore what happens, I had to leave them some cash, was still in my bag. So I started counting the money, and it became it was so jolly, because they were finding an extra 20 quid there, and they were counting, calling everyone, come and see how much money we've got here. And I was just standing in front, and everyone was laughing. And we counted £1,481 were in my handbag. I had no idea. And it really was very jolly. So it meant that all the way, also the people who were there escorting me and so on, it became quite a big joke. And they were all, basically they were trying to help you. And I thought that was really good. I got on incredibly well with all of them, with the prison officers, with all the support system that exists in the prison. And I didn't know that it was because I was different to everybody else, because I was watching others coming in as I was waiting to go through my various systems of entering to Holloway. And they were dealing with them the same way. Oh, hello, nice to see you again, because somebody had been, well, obviously there were some repeat offenders, but they were going through the same process of coming in and having chats and
a surprising sense of civility.
Yes. And the women that I met, who were the sort of inmates, incredibly helpful as well. And there was a huge amount of solidarity. That may not exist in men's prisons, but it does in women's.
Yeah. Was Holloway what you expected?
I didn't know what to expect at all. It was freezing cold. And so on. But I was glad I was there for only 4 days.
Of course, you wrote a book about your experiences in prison. Did you decide you'd do that in advance? Was focusing on that a sort of coping mechanism, if you like, albeit a very positive one?
Well, I started writing a little diary, little points of what I was doing in the day, and that's how the book is a diary. It doesn't talk much about my personal experience necessarily, but it just gives you an idea of what was happening on that day. And depending on what was happening, I would then interject quite a lot of sort of economic stuff in it, in terms of the cost of this and the cost of that, and why this isn't working, and what we've learned from this type of analysis and so on. And lots of people send me lots of information while I was there. Yeah. Reports that had been done on prisons and the whole criminal justice system. So, and then I have to admit that my publisher then sent me a note saying, you think perhaps of writing about it? So we agreed on sort of Prisonomics. That would be the title. So I carried on doing little notes throughout. And of course, I was also receiving so many letters. So there'd be times I'd get, I don't know what your experience was, but I'd get 100 a day. And of course, I had to read them. But I also had to do my work in there. So because there were lots of paparazzi who were coming to see what I was doing,
You had by the time you get to open prison, you had your own room.
Oh yes, I'm sorry. I completely forgot to say that. Of course, I moved after 4 days. I didn't have my own room. No. I was sharing it with 2 others.
Right. Able to work though.
Yes. And of course, there is space there. You can go into other rooms.
Yes.
So it's quite easy. But I didn't work outside, whereas my roommates worked outside all day. Whereas because of the paparazzi there, who were climbing on trees and waiting to see whether they can see me move around the gardens, we decided I would have an indoor job, which was to make sure the kitchen preparations for breakfast and lunch were all okay, and the table settings were fine, and it was all clean. So nobody fell ill during my watching. I was very, very pleased about that. So I was doing that, and I was inside, which meant that I had quite a lot of time to do all the reading and writing and so on. So, and then the telephoning. And the good thing about having gone in with so much money is that I was able to, it's very expensive ringing, I was able to ring quite a bit and then buy those things additional, which we shared with others, whereas lots of others couldn't quite do that, and that was very lucky.
So you're giving a sense here of having once again turned to work really as your armory, if you like, or as your sort of methodology for getting through it.
I learned to play bingo as well, though, I have to say. So it wasn't all work. In fact, it was front page news in the Sun. Vicky Pryce learns to plays bingo. It
must have been a slow news day. You also touched on the humour though, and how important that is. I couldn't agree more that humour is massively undervalued as a sort of coping mechanism. Important to you too, yes, throughout the process.
Hugely, and there were some incredibly funny moments where we'd been in stitches. I mean, it really, it wasn't just in order to, pass the time. So many women are so depressed because they were, deep down, probably we all were depressed, away from children and so on. And you needed that humor to survive. So when people realized that somebody was really down because there was a problem with their child, they just came off the phone, and the child was being bullied at school because the mother was away, and so on and so forth, then we would think of other ways of cheering them up. So there was a lot of that going on. And that was so encouraging in terms of human nature, if you like.
Yes. Yeah. You served alongside women who were, as you say yourself, who were in much more precarious positions than you, socially, economically, risk of losing their home, their family. And they obviously informed a lot of your book. But what did you learn from those women who that you spent time with? What did you learn from them during and after the experience?
How vulnerable they were. I mean, that was really interesting and worrying. But also, I think what I learned about life is that things can happen just like that. So, and you don't actually control sometimes those things that happen. So it's quite dangerous. So some were there because they were involved in some fight which had much to do with them, just 1 second event, or someone they were with got hurt, or they were involved in some event where somebody was really hurt, and it can happen without too much warning. So you're normal one moment, and then you're no longer, and that's quite dangerous. So I find that, yes, I can talk about controlling feelings and all that sort of stuff, but things happen, can hit you, tragedies can happen, and a lot of the women are unprepared for this and what the implications of this would be, and it can shatter your lives completely, just like that, at the a momentary lapse, if you like. So I was inclined, I think as I wrote in the book as well, I can't remember, to write to all my kids and say, while I'm away, don't leave the house. It's too dangerous. So it makes you aware of how
how uncertain everything is, and
especially when you
planning,
especially when you look at the young people that are in prison,
whose life can be, there were people who were accountants or whatever they were, and something happened, and of course they can't go back to that, or who can't go back to the community because of whatever may have happened, and it could just happen like that, and you leave your house in the morning thinking you've all these plans for the future or whatever it is you want to do, and all that just stops. And that's the unfairness of it, that by then being sent to prison and of course having a record and so on, a lot of them can't go back to where they were, and lives are ruined forever. That's my worry.
You've been very active, Vicky, in the debate about prison reform. We won't rehearse all that here. I think that's probably for another podcast. But there's one truth about prison that I suspect we can both agree on, that by its very nature, it sort of breaks family bonds. And in doing so, more often than not, creates a new generation of criminals. That kind of that statistic about the children of criminals is always, I think, the most heartbreaking. I mean, I saw that with young dads in prison, but I'm guessing that it was pretty visceral for you with fellow inmates who were young mothers.
Well, yes, indeed. And I'm a trustee also of Women in Prison, the charity that looks after women, and with loads of centres and so on around the country. So, and we look very much at what the impact is, of course, and how they can rebuild their lives, if you like. But also whatever other help they may need. So yes, you could see the worries that many had in terms of losing their kids. But I have written about the cost of taking children into care that very often is considerably greater than the cost of putting a woman in prison. It doesn't make very much sense in society. And of course, children in care are much more likely to then be involved in antisocial activities than those who are not. So we are basically perpetuating the whole problem.
It goes to the balance of victims as well, though, doesn't it? Because obviously a lot of people would argue that yes, of course, that child has rights, but so do the victims of those crimes. But I get
absolutely, absolutely, and that has to be recognised. There could be different ways of doing it, perhaps making it up, if you like, to the victims. But you don't actually achieve an awful lot if you just basically don't have the indirect impact on families and children, which then of course increases the likelihood of crime happening anyway, so there'll be more victims. And also, of course, as we know, going to prison increases the chances of somebody reoffending or offending. So you don't do anything in relation to reducing the number of victims that way.
Yes. And I've no doubt there have been difficult days when you've wondered how this new life, if you like, will work out. Have I got that about right?
Oh, there are all sorts of things that would have happened that can't happen now. There's no doubt about that. So life has changed very significantly in terms of what one can achieve or can expect by comparison to what perhaps would have been a normal path otherwise. So all sorts of things that, or gongs or whatever you could have got possibly, but which, who knows. But you are in a different situation. There's no doubt about that. And also, there's no doubt in my mind that some of the things I could have done, or even sort of types of work I could have done, haven't happened because of my record. But other things have opened up that probably I wouldn't even have considered doing or thought of doing if that hadn't happened. Or even things I might have written that, or I have written, which I would never have thought of doing otherwise. Or even my entire view on how evidence is used in government. I do talk quite a lot about, because all the evidence on prisons exists there already, it just hasn't properly been used. So I've moved into areas that I wouldn't have done before, but there's no doubt that it's much harder. So we talked earlier about the work ethic. I've had to work incredibly hard, because I'm sure everyone else in my position has done, who's managed to get back somehow, in order to be able to do what I'm doing at present. So I could easily have just given up and
don't know, gone on a very, very long holiday.
But you just, I guess what a lot of these questions are getting to is, how, you're on one level, you're being incredibly self-effacing in saying that that's just the choice you made and that's just what you did. But of course, there are all manner of other choices you could have made and you didn't, and that's what I'm interested in really, is how did you get to that state of mind, not just so quickly, but so effectively, Vicky? Because you have been sort of laser-like in the approach that you almost immediately. You wrote the book in prison. You come out of prison and you're giving speeches within weeks. That takes enormous kind of courage, quite aside from anything else. How is it that you were able to do that?
I think it's mainly because of the support both of sort of family, but also the network that is absolutely essential. I remember I had only come out of prison maybe a few weeks. I had already received a letter while I was in open prison from the European subcommittee at the House of Lords to go and give evidence on Europe, would you believe it? As soon as I come out. So, and I went on the bus wearing my tag because I was still on curfew for a couple of months, into the House of Lords to give that evidence, and finding there were loads and loads of, I think it was probably the best attended event of the Europe subcommittee at the time. All these journalists who I knew were there to write about it, and of course I had to write, the sketch writers mainly. And of course what they were trying to do throughout the period that I was speaking and I was there sitting at a desk alongside some ex-colleagues, friends, other economists, was to see where my tag was, where was I wearing it. And they couldn't find it, so there were all sorts of assumptions. Well, perhaps it's in a bracelet, maybe it's the bracelet she's wearing, and of course I was hiding it incredibly well, because they had been very good when they came with the tag in all paraphernalia, so it was put in such a way that trousers were covering it. It was fine. We were really good about this. So that was quite funny. So and I did indeed give evidence. So it was people who knew me on that committee who asked me to go on purpose, I'm sure. So I think I was helped by that. I was helped by offers of jobs. I was helped by offers of being patron in various things while I was still in there. So that was quite nice. So in a way, it was the network that did it, really. It was the fact that people were prepared to employ me.
I mean, obviously people appreciated that, you had enormous value to add, in particular, to the prison reform debate, but also acts of kindness. Is that how you would characterise it? Oh, yeah,
completely. All people who were prepared to take the risk.
Yes.
So who weren't fazed by this and who may have had to explain it to the odd client.
Yes.
And then it sort of, widened from there, speakers, events, and et cetera, and then academic stuff, which I had been doing from before. Lots of them came back because I was there and doing things.
Yes.
So you use the network, but you also create your own opportunities as much as you can, but also accept that it's not going to be very easy all along at all, and that you're going to have setbacks.
Has the professional and the personal recovery happened at the same pace, would you say?
The professional recovery certainly helps. So the two are very much linked, yes, absolutely. But I also, if you feel that you have the personal support as well, then that's good news. And in terms of friends more generally as well, that has worked very well indeed. So I didn't speak to many people before, but I can tell you that they were all there. I would say that 90% of people I was linking up with, and there were quite a lot of them, were very supportive, and that was brilliant.
What's your attitude towards the 10% who weren't?
Oh, I just don't see them. I don't have any problem at all. So it's perfectly normal. I think through life you go through periods of, people moving away for particular reasons or what have you. So it's
no bitterness about that.
The interesting thing is I get absolutely no bitterness, whether it's the media or anyone else or the legal establishment or anything. I absolutely no point at all, and very open to. In fact, there've been some I hadn't seen for a bit, and they all come back. No problem whatsoever. So I decided there was no point, but also not that way inclined.
Let's move on to the crisis we're all now finding ourselves in. I don't know about you, but the lockdown has certainly brought back some memories of being on tag. But in terms of the politics, from the outside looking in, the scientists seem to have had a much louder voice in this crisis than the economists. You've been in a few of those rooms, Vicky, during your time in government. Was the effect of pandemics, or the potential effect of a pandemic, the economic effect, if you like, was that modelled at all in your experience?
Oh, we had some practice, if you like, because of course there was, the 9/11 attack and the impact that had on travel and particular sectors. So, and then there were a number of concerns about pandemics, but particularly there was swine flu, of course, that we worried about, and of course the BSC, I think it is that what it's called, problem with the bovine illness that of course had huge impact on the agricultural sector. So yes, the economists were all involved in looking at some of those impacts and what it would mean at the time, and I remember even being involved in that myself. But what do you know about uncertainty? A little bit like the uncertainty, because we just weren't prepared for the financial crisis back in 2008, 2009, is that you don't actually know what the reaction of the players is going to be. And therefore, you've got to try everything you can to rectify the situation. So the evidence gives you a little bit of information of what works and doesn't work. But if the environment is so different, unprecedented, then it's trial and error, I'm afraid. And that's why right now everyone is just putting forward scenarios rather than forecasts, because you don't know what's going to happen internationally. You don't know about how bad this health problem is going to be. You don't know whether countries will open up fast enough. Now they are, some of them. You don't know whether trade will ever return to where it was. You don't actually know what business will do in terms of all the supply chains. You don't know how individuals are going to react. In fact, you never know what individuals will do. In fact, I do remember in all the modeling that people have done in the past, and we all did, that the consumption function is the most difficult one to estimate, because you just don't know whether consumers are going to be saving more, spending more. Behavior. So as an economist, you've got some contribution to make, not quite significant contribution to make, but what you're basically going to be saying is throw it as much as you can at the problem and see what sticks.
Do you think that what this has exposed is a lack of behavioural science thinking in government? Is that what you're saying, that there's not enough? There hasn't been enough preparation. There isn't enough, modelling or sort of disaster planning in terms of, as you've just said, how society will react to a situation like this.
I think that's been lacking, and it is indeed the fact that there weren't any economists on stage, but there were some statisticians. There are statisticians, there are modelers, but I think one needed to listen a lot more to the economists. But of course, they have been influencing what the Chancellor of the Exchequer has been doing. And that has been quite useful, even though, in my view, there's still a huge lack of understanding of how business actually operates, and particularly small and medium enterprises.
So where are we?
They get it very wrong.
Where are we heading, do you think? What does the next 2 to 3 years look like in the UK from your perspective?
Oh, there will be a recovery. There's no doubt about that, unless there's a new pandemic that hits us. But at least now we know perhaps what to do, but what we do is we just stop everything. So that isn't going to be very good for growth. But maybe we'll have more beds. Maybe the NHS will be better supplied in the future. But I think we have crossed the point where we can really be cutting the way that was done after the financial crisis. Very, very wrong thing to do, and leave public services in such a way that they can't actually cope. it all with what hits them. And you've got to just lock everything down and stop activity generally. So I think we've learned that, and we will be spending a lot more in those areas. But we may come out of it also with a better idea of what type of society we want in the future.
Vicky, you've been incredibly generous with your time and with your insights. Sincere thanks. Before you go, I'd like to ask you for your crisis cures. These are 3 things. Anything other than another person that you've sort of lent on during the tricky times. Anything other than another, as I say, anything other than another human being.
Well, I'm a football fan. I'm afraid I support Chelsea, and even
don't be afraid, Vicky. I mean, I'm a Spurs fan. I mean,
oh right, all right. So
that's a cross to carry.
So I just love to watch go. I'm a season ticket holder. Go with kids, and that's a great release from any tension. Although, of course, you substitute one type of tension with another.
Yes.
So I'm the sort of person who really sort of screams a lot, and occasionally my children move away from me because I scream too much. So so that's
how have you coped without the football?
With difficulty, I have to say, although it's been a godsend in some ways, because we were doing really badly and we were about to be thrashed by Bayern Munich in the second leg of the Champions League.
Yes.
That was about to happen, but we somehow or other managed to have these 2 glorious games where we beat both Liverpool and then Everton. I think it was 4-something in each case, but I can't quite remember. Certainly the Everton one was 4. Yeah, I should remember this now, but it's been many months ago. So we left on a high.
Yeah.
So that was all right. But of course, it's about to all restart. But at least we've been spared the Champions League ones, which have basically been abandoned. So yes, football, very, very, very important. And I watched it every opportunity.
What else?
Books.
I need 3 things from you so far. So you have your Chelsea season ticket. What are the other 2 things?
Well, books. They certainly keep me going, and I'm pretty open as to what types of books. So,
is there a particular book? And perhaps when when you're in when you were in prison, was there a particular book that you turned to?
There's one book that I love, and in fact I was sent some Graham Greene, which is one of his books called, which is not that well known, Dr. Fischer of Geneva, or The Bomb Party. It's about greed. And it shows that the richer you are, the greedier you are, and the more risks you're prepared to take to make more money. And it's an incredible book. And I've read and reread it, and I have to admit that every time I reread it, I think it's less of a good book than I thought at the beginning, but it had certainly made, in terms of how it's written,
yes.
But it certainly made a huge impact on me in terms of its subject matter.
Super. One other?
One other. It's the sea. When I want to relax, I think of swimming and looking at the horizon on a beach in Greece.
Wonderful. Vicky, thank you so much for your time. And as I say, for giving us your perspective on crisis. It's enormously appreciated.
So thank you very much.
Thanks for listening to Crisis What Crisis. Do feel free to email your feedback to info@coulsonpartners.com, where you'll also find the show notes giving you the key insights from our guests. There are more useful conversations on the way, so please do subscribe, and if you like what you hear, give us a rating and a review. Thanks again.